My name is Ethan, I'm 32 years old, and my parents left me at a fancy restaurant with a $12,000 bill as a joke. Before I tell you how their world came crashing down and they came begging me just 3 days later, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. It all started on what was supposed to be a milestone, a celebration of the man who, for my entire life, I had been desperately trying to please. My father, Frank Taylor. He was turning 60. In our small hometown of Ridgeview, Pennsylvania, my father was a titan. He was the CEO of a regional tech company, a name people knew, a man who commanded respect when he walked into a room. To the world, he was a pillar of the community. But at home, inside the walls of the sprawling house I grew up in, he was a different kind of ruler, a king of a tiny, unhappy kingdom, and I was his permanent disappointment. You see, I was the son who got away but not in the way he wanted. I moved to Chicago and built a successful career as a software engineer. I had my own life, my own success. But in their world, my success was always seen as less than. It wasn't Harvard, like my older sister, Rebecca. It wasn't a marriage to a politician with a toothpaste ad smile, like her husband, Derek. My work was on computers, something my father called my little games. It wasn't real world enough for him. And yet, despite my life being a continent away, I was the one they leaned on. I was the silent, invisible pillar holding up their crumbling facade. When my mother's retail therapy resulted in a credit card bill that made her gasp, I was the one who quietly paid it off. When the mortgage payment was a week late and the bank started calling, a single text to me would make the problem disappear. It was a soul-crushing, unspoken agreement I'd accepted for years, fueled by the foolish, stubborn hope that one day, I would do enough, give enough, be enough to finally earn their respect. To finally be seen as their son, not just their emergency fund. This birthday, I told myself, would be the one. 60 years old. A landmark. I decided to make a grand gesture. I spent months putting money aside, and I bought him a watch. It was a beautiful, classic Swiss timepiece that cost $5,000. It was more than a gift. It was a statement. A plea. See me. Value me. Acknowledge me. The evening of the dinner, I could feel the heavy, smooth wooden box in my coat pocket. This weight was a constant, tangible reminder of my hope. The restaurant was the Embers, a place so exclusive it felt like a private club. The tablecloths were blindingly white. The waiters moved with a silent, unnerving grace. I had booked their best private dining room. And of course, I was paying for everything. That was a given. After the meal, after my family had filed out for their surprise, the manager, a woman named Maria with kind, sad eyes, came over to my table. The pity in her expression was a warning siren. She looked at me, then at the bill in her hand, and then back at me. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "When your father made the reservation, he mentioned that you would be handling all expenses tonight." I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I nodded. Yes, that's right. That was the plan. She bit her lip, hesitating before delivering the blow. It's just, he also said something else. He told my colleague to think of tonight as a critical investment in the family's future. The words hung in the air, cold and alien. An investment, not a party, not a celebration. It was the first clear sign that this night wasn't about him turning 60. It was about what he thought he could get from me. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't an honored guest at a birthday dinner. I was the fatted calf, and the slaughter was about to begin. To understand why a 32-year-old man, a successful engineer living on his own terms in a major city, would still be tangled in this web, you have to understand the nature of the chains. They weren't forged from love. They were forged from a carefully crafted blend of guilt, obligation, and the dangling carrot of a legacy I was taught to believe was also mine. My father's company, Taylor Innovations, was a ghost. On the outside, it still had the shiny headquarters and my father still had the title of CEO, but inside it was rotting. It was a dinosaur sinking into the tar pit of modern technology. And I was the secret, frantic effort trying to keep its head above the surface. This wasn't a recent development. The bleeding had started years ago. I remember my first major investment. It was about 3 years prior. I had just gotten a huge bonus from a project I'd poured my life into for a year. I was ecstatic, already mentally shopping for a condo in downtown Chicago. My own piece of the world. Then the phone rang. It was my dad. "Ethan, son," he began. His voice laced with that specific brand of forced casualness he used when he wanted something. "Listen, just a bit of a temporary cash flow problem down here at the office. The quarterly numbers are a little soft. I need to make payroll for the guys. Can't have them worrying right before the holidays. Could you spot me 20 grand? Just for a couple of weeks. The Henderson contract is about to close. It's a sure thing, of course. For the company, for the employees, for him. I didn't even hesitate. The condo could wait. This was family. This was responsibility. I transferred the money that same day. The Henderson contract, of course, never materialized. My $20,000 became a ghost too, absorbed into the company's ever-growing debt, never to be spoken of again. That was the first time I felt the cold hook sink in. The second time was worse. He flew to Chicago. He showed up at my office, looking older, more desperate. He didn't just ask for money. He put on a full performance. He spread blueprints and projections across my conference room table, a grand vision for a new product line that even I, with my limited hardware knowledge, could see was a decade out of date. "This is it, Ethan," he'd said, his eyes wild with a desperate salesman's gleam. "This is the reinvention, the comeback. But the banks? They're cowards. They don't see the vision. They want years of profit statements, not potential. He put his hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly tight. But you see it, don't you? You're a builder. You're an innovator. You're my son. The words were a carefully chosen cocktail of flattery and obligation. He wasn't just asking for money. He was asking for faith. I need 50,000, Ethan. It's not a loan, he'd said, looking me straight in the eye. It's your stake, your buy-in. I'll make you a minority partner, an investment in the Taylor name. Our name. I remember looking at my own financial forecast, the dream of my condo slipping further and further away. And then I looked at my father's face, a mask of hope and fear, and I caved. I wrote the check. The partnership papers never came. That was the true nature of my chains. It wasn't just a son helping his parents. It was a son being systematically drained to keep a failing empire afloat, all under the guise of family duty. My father's reputation, my mother's social life, the country club membership, the big house, it was all a stage set, and I was the one secretly paying the lighting bill. If I walked away, the whole set would collapse, and he had engineered it so that the collapse would feel like my fault. The emotional manipulation was constant. A low-grade poison I'd been consuming my entire life. Thanksgiving, just a year before the restaurant incident, was a perfect example. I'd flown home, bringing with me an expensive, artisanal bourbon for my father and a delicate silk scarf for my mother. My sister Rebecca and her husband Derek were there, of course. Derek was holding court, telling some story about a meeting in the state capitol. My father was hanging on his every word. I handed my dad the bourbon. Happy Thanksgiving, Dad. He took it, glanced at the label, and nodded. Right? Thanks, Ethan. He put the bottle on a side table and immediately turned back to Derek. So, the senator said, what now? A few minutes later, Rebecca gave our dad a gag gift. A talking fish that sang, "Take me to the river." My father roared with laughter. He spent the next 10 minutes making everyone watch the stupid fish sing. The expensive bourbon I'd brought sat on the side table, forgotten. Later, I tried to show my mom an article that had been written about a piece of software I'd helped design. I was proud of it. She glanced at the screen of my phone for a second before waving a dismissive hand. Oh, that's nice, honey. All those little dots and dashes, she'd said. Listen. I have to tell you about the most dreadful woman from the garden club. My successes were trivialities. My little computer job was a cute hobby that happened to pay well enough to fund their real, important lives. That was the narrative. The only person who seemed to see through the fog was my Uncle James, my dad's younger, quieter brother. James was a high school history teacher, a man who found his value in books and ideas, not balance sheets and social status. He'd cornered me in the kitchen that Thanksgiving while I was getting a glass of water, a refugee from the living room performance. Heard about the new project, James said, his voice low. Sounds impressive. It was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged it. I felt a lump form in my throat. Thanks, Uncle James. He leaned against the counter, his expression serious. Listen to me, Ethan. Your dad, he's a good man in a hurricane. But he's always in a hurricane. And he thinks anyone who isn't swept up with him isn't loyal. He paused, looking out the window. I've seen him do this before. With his business partners. With our own father. He finds someone strong and leans on them until they break. Don't let him break you. Don't let him turn your success into his safety net. I wanted to believe he was just being cynical. I wanted to believe my father's desperation was temporary. Because the alternative was an abyss of pain. The realization that the man I'd spent my life trying to impress saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. So when Frank called me a month before his 60th birthday, his voice filled with an energy I hadn't heard in years, I chose to believe him. I clung to his words like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. Ethan, big news, he boomed over the phone. The board and I have been talking. A lot. We've been looking at your contributions and your expertise. This birthday, son, it's not just a party. It's a turning point. A new chapter. We're going to celebrate, and then the next morning you and I are going to sit down with the lawyers and make it official. A seat on the board. Ethan. Your name on the door of Taylor Innovations. It's time. A seat on the board. My name on the door. It was the magic spell I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. It was the promise of legitimacy. The promise of respect. The promise that I was finally, truly part of the family business I had been secretly funding. That's why I bought the watch. The $5,000 watch was my celebration. It was my vote of confidence. It was my acceptance of his offer. Now, standing in that cold, empty dining room, the silence screaming in my ears, my uncle's words and Maria's warning echoed in my mind. Don't let him turn you into his safety net. A critical investment in the family's future. My hope, once a blazing bonfire, was now just a pile of ash, and a cold, hard certainty began to settle in my gut. This wasn't a turning point. It was a trap, and I had just walked right into it. The dinner itself had been a masterclass in psychological warfare, disguised as a family celebration. The private room was beautiful, all dark wood and soft lighting. The food was exquisite, but the atmosphere was thick with a tension only I seemed to feel. My father held court at the head of the table, laughing, telling old stories where he was always the hero. My mother, Karen, played the part of the adoring wife, touching his arm at just the right moments, her laughter a bright, brittle sound. My sister, Rebecca, and her husband, Derek, sat across from me, a perfect team of smiling assassins. Every conversation was a performance, a carefully constructed play designed to highlight their importance and my irrelevance. Derek had a meeting with the lieutenant governor last week, Rebecca said, casually dropping the title like a diamond on the table. They were discussing the new tech initiative for the state. They're looking for real innovators, people with vision, She gave me a tight, pitying smile. It's all about brick-and-mortar infrastructure, of course. Tangible things. Of course, I murmured, taking a sip of the ridiculously expensive wine I was paying for. Derek leaned forward, his expression one of earnestness. You know, Ethan, we should talk sometime. Your skills could be useful. The state is always looking for people to handle their database management. Good. Steady work. He said it like he was offering a stray dog a bone. Steady work. I was running a team of 12 engineers on a multi-million-dollar project for a global logistics firm, and he was offering me a job as a government database jockey. The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with my steak knife. The main event arrived with the dessert menus. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. I reached into my coat pocket, my hand closing around the cool, smooth wooden box. I waited for a lull in the conversation. Dad, I said, my voice a little louder than I intended. I have something for you. Happy birthday. I slid the box across the polished table. All eyes turned to it. For a single, fleeting second, I saw a flicker of genuine curiosity in my father's eyes. He took the box. He opened it. The watch was magnificent. It lay on a bed of black velvet. Its silver face and clean, elegant lines a study in understated power. It was a watch for a serious man, a successful man, a man of substance. My father picked it up. The hefty timepiece looked almost delicate in his thick, powerful hands. He grunted. Ha! Swiss, eh. He fumbled with the clasp for a moment, then strapped it onto his wrist over the cuff of his shirt. He gave it a single, cursory glance, a flick of the wrist. Nice, son. Very nice. And then, before I could even process the crushing disappointment, he turned to the waiter who was hovering nearby. Let's get a round of digestives. The 25-year-old single malt for the men. He clapped his hands together, the new watch glinting under the lights. The moment was over. My grand gesture, my $5,000 plea for recognition, had been acknowledged with the same enthusiasm one might grant a free pen from a bank. I felt the blood drain from my face. I felt dizzy. I wanted to stand up, scream, and walk out, but I was paralyzed, trapped by a lifetime of conditioning. That's when my father launched into the final, cruel act of the evening. All right, everyone, he announced, his voice booming with false cheer. Gather round. I have a brilliant idea for my birthday surprise. He winked at the table, a conspirator. It's a classic prank. We're all going to sneak out of here, go hide in the hotel lobby bar next door, and when poor Ethan comes out, thinking we've ditched him on my birthday, we all jump out and yell surprise. The look on his face will be priceless. My mother and Rebecca clapped their hands, giggling like schoolgirls. Derek chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. It was so juvenile, so unbelievably mean-spirited, that I couldn't wrap my head around it. Dad, I don't know. I started, but he cut me off. Nonsense. It'll be hilarious. He boomed, getting to his feet and slapping me hard on the back. You're a good sport, Ethan. Always have been. Now you stay here. Settle the bill with the waiter like a good son. Count to, say, 150, then come find us. Don't be a slowpoke. He herded them out of the room. My mother blew me a theatrical kiss. Rebecca gave me a smirk that said, look at you, you poor sucker. And then they were gone. I sat alone at the massive table, surrounded by the wreckage of a $12,000 meal. The silence was deafening. I felt like I was in a nightmare. It's a joke, I told myself. A stupid, cruel frat boy joke. But just a joke. I paid the bill, my hands shaking as I signed the credit card slip. Then I sat back down and started to count. I counted slowly, drawing it out, giving them plenty of time to get set up for their punchline. 150. I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked out of the private room, through the main dining hall where couples murmured and laughed, and into the grand lobby. It was empty. No family. No surprise. Just a bored-looking bellhop and the faint sound of a piano from the bar. I checked the hotel bar. They weren't there. I checked the valet stand outside. The family's big Lincoln SUV was gone. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, began to pool in my stomach. I stood on the curb for 20 minutes, the chill of the night air seeping into my bones. People walked past, staring at the guy in the expensive suit standing alone outside a fancy restaurant. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush crawling up my neck. That's when I went back inside. That's when I found Maria, the manager, who looked at me with those sad, knowing eyes. And that's when she told me about the critical investment. The fury that rose in me was clean and hot, burning away the shame. I needed proof. I needed to see it for myself. The security cameras, I said to her, my voice surprisingly steady. When he made the reservation, I need to see it. She must have seen the desperation in my eyes, because she led me without a word to a small, cramped back office dominated by a bank of monitors. She was skilled with the system, her fingers flying over the keyboard, rewinding the footage from a week prior. And there he was, my father. He was leaning on the reservation desk, all charm and smiles with the daytime manager. He was pointing at the floor plan, tapping the private room. Then he laughed, a big, hearty laugh, and I saw him make a gesture towards his wallet, then shake his head and point to an imaginary person sitting where I had been sitting all night. He clapped the manager on the back, a conspiratorial man-to-man gesture. The look on his face wasn't the look of a father planning a party. It was the look of a con man setting up his mark. The air left my lungs. The last shred of doubt, the last vestige of hope that this was all a misunderstanding, evaporated. It was a plan. It was deliberate. I stumbled out of the office, thanking Maria in a choked whisper. I made it back to my lonely table and collapsed into a chair. I pulled out my phone, my fingers feeling like clumsy sausages. A notification lit up the screen. A new post in the Taylor Family Fun group chat. It was a selfie. All four of them. My father, mother, sister, and brother-in-law, crammed into the front seat of their car. They were all roaring with laughter, their faces distorted in manic glee. My father was pointing back towards the restaurant, his mouth open in a silent howl of mirth. The caption, written by Rebecca, was, "Hope he's good at washing dishes. LOL. Hashtag best prank ever. Hashtag dads 60th. My thumb scrolled numbly, a ghost moving over the screen. There were more messages. From my mother. Don't be such a spoilsport, Ethan. It's important to be able to laugh at yourself. From Rebecca. Seriously, maybe this will teach you a lesson about financial responsibility. And then, the one from my father. The text that was the final nail in the coffin of the son I used to be. Thanks for dinner, kiddo. Consider it payback for all the years we had to put up with you. Payback. The word was a physical blow. Payback for what? For existing? For not being the son he wanted? For being the one who actually had the money to pay for his ridiculous ego-driven party. My phone buzzed again. Private text, this one from Frank to me alone. The mask was off. This was the real message. That was a good test. You passed. The final investment to save the company is $250,000. My lawyer will have the papers ready for you to sign at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. The audacity of it stole my breath. This entire night, this public humiliation, was a test. A prelude to a $250,000 demand. I looked at the bill again. $12,079.45. I looked at the laughing faces on my phone. I looked at the demand for $250,000. Something inside me, a core part of my being that had been compressed for 32 years, didn't just break. It detonated. The explosion was silent, internal, but it obliterated everything in its path. The hope, the guilt, the fear, the desperate need for their approval, all of it was vaporized. In its place was a chilling, absolute clarity. I stood up and walked to the front desk where Maria was watching me with concern. My credit card has a $10,000 limit, I said. My voice is calm and flat as a frozen lake. I am putting that on the bill right now. I will return tomorrow morning to settle the remaining balance of $2,079.45. In cash. I handed her my card. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want their help. I wanted them to see that I was a man who paid his debts. As I walked out of the embers for the final time, into the cold night air, I was no longer a son running to his family. I was a man walking away from his abusers. They thought the joke was on me. They had no idea it was about to backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. The hotel was only a few blocks away, but the walk felt like a journey across a foreign planet. The familiar streets of my hometown looked alien, hostile. I was a ghost in my own past. Inside the sterile, anonymous hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the silence. It was the sound of the end of the world. My world, at least. The man who had checked into this room, the one who had carefully laid out his suit and polished his shoes with a hopeful heart, was gone. He'd been naive. He'd been a fool. He'd believed in a fairy tale. The man sitting here now, staring at the bland corporate art on the wall, was a stranger to me. He was cold. He was methodical. And he was about to go to work.
Hey guys, real quick, I hope you're enjoying the story. Don't forget to subscribe, it would really help the page. Thanks for supporting.
My first call was to the 24-hour fraud department of my bank. My voice was unnervingly calm. My name is Ethan Miller, I said to the operator. I need an immediate and total lockdown of all my accounts. Checking, savings, brokerage, everything. I want a complete security overhaul. New passwords, new verbal passcodes, mandatory two-factor authentication sent to a new, secure email address I am setting up as we speak. Certainly, Mr. Miller, the operator said, a hint of alarm in her professional tone. May I ask the reason? Do you believe your accounts have been compromised? A dry, mirthless laugh escaped my lips. No, I said. I believe they are about to be targeted by my family. While she worked, her clicks and keystrokes a faint sound over the line, I asked her the critical question. Can you check for any recent failed login attempts on my primary savings account? There was a pause. I could hear her typing. Yes, sir. I see one here. An unsuccessful login attempt was made about an hour ago. At 10:17 p.m. The IP address originates from a residential network in Ridgeview, Pennsylvania. I closed my eyes. Of course. While they were laughing in the car, my father, likely using my mother's old laptop whose password he knew I'd set for her, was already trying to stick his hand in the cookie jar. The $12,000 dinner was just the appetizer. The main course was my life savings. Thank you, I said to the operator. You've been very helpful. With my financial fortress secured, I moved on to the demolition phase. I logged into my online banking portal, a place I usually only visited to check my portfolio. Tonight, I was visiting the payment center. It was a list of my obligations. Or rather, their obligations that I had foolishly taken on. Frank and Karen Taylor monthly mortgage payment, $3,250. Pending for the first. I navigated to the payment, my cursor hovering over the button. For a split second, I saw the house in my mind's eye, the porch swing, the oak tree in the front yard. Then I saw my father's sneering face in the group chat selfie. I clicked. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? Yes. Karen Taylor, American Express card, pay in full. $2,180. Pending for the 5th. I pictured her at the country club, laughing with her friends. All of it funded by my little computer job. Click. Payment cancelled. Frank Taylor Ridge View Country Club monthly dues and fees. $800. Click. Cancelled. One by one, I dismantled the financial scaffolding that was holding up their lives. With every click, I felt a layer of grime being scrubbed from my soul. But the anger was still there. It was a wild, roaring beast inside me, and it needed to be caged, to be understood. My mind, trained to find order in chaos to debug flawed systems, kicked into overdrive. I didn't want to just feel the betrayal. I needed to quantify it. I opened my laptop. I created a new, blank spreadsheet. The blinking cursor on cell A1 was a starting point. A ground zero. I started with my oldest accessible online bank statements, 10 years back. I searched for keywords. Frank. Karen. Taylor Innovations. Loan. Help. The first hits came quickly. A $500 transfer here for car repairs. A $1,000 transfer there for a leaky roof. The small things. The death by 1,000 cuts. As the hours bled into one another, the hotel room silent except for the furious tapping of my keys, I became an archaeologist of my own life. I was digging through the sediment of a decade, unearthing the fossilized remains of my own naivete. I found old emails with subject lines like, "A little help for your old man," and text messages begging for a quick loan, until some imaginary check cleared. The numbers on the spreadsheet grew, cell by cell, line by line. It was a horrifying, mesmerizing process. Each number was a memory. Each transaction was a lie I had willingly believed. The sun was beginning to cast a pale, sickly light through the gap in the hotel curtains when I finally reached the last statement. My hands were shaking. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen. I navigated to the bottom of the column, the endless list of my own folly, and I typed in the simple formula. I hit enter. The number that flashed onto the screen was obscene. It was monstrous. $457,219.34. I stared at it, the glowing green digits burning into my retinas. Nearly $500,000. It was a number so large, so absurd, that it felt fictional. But it was real. It was the cost of my childhood. It was the price of my misplaced love. It was the meticulously documented proof that my family wasn't a family. It was a criminal enterprise. And I was the sole victim. The rage I felt was so pure, so absolute, it almost felt peaceful. It burned away everything else. But then, in the silence that followed, a different feeling crept in. Cold, hollow grief. I had a number for the money. What was the number for the lost years? For the public humiliations? For the gnawing feeling of never being good enough? My eyes landed on my suitcase, and I remembered the photo, the one I always carried. I unzipped the side pocket and pulled it out. Me, a gap-toothed 5-year-old, perched on my father's shoulders at the county fair. We were both laughing, caught in a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. In the photo he looked like a giant, my hero. I held the small frame, my thumb tracing the outline of his younger, happier face. A sound tore from my throat, a ragged, ugly sob that was 30 years in the making. It was the sound of that 5-year-old boy finally understanding that his hero was a villain. The grief was a tidal wave. It washed away the anger, the clarity, everything. All I could feel was the crushing weight of loss. What was I doing? This was my father, my mother. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should just call, scream, cry, and then give in. Send the $250,000. Go back to the way things were. At least the pain was familiar. My hand trembled as I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's name. I was so close to breaking, so close to crawling back. I couldn't trust myself. I scrolled past her name, past all the Taylors, and found the one name I knew would be an anchor in this hurricane. Leo, my best friend in Chicago. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. Man, it's 4 a.m. here. Is everything okay? No. I choked out, the word barely a whisper. No, Leo. I think I just lost my family. I poured it all out. The dinner, the bill, the texts, the security camera, the spreadsheet with its monstrous number. I told him about the picture, about the unbearable pain, about the fact that I was one thumb press away from erasing it all and going back to being their fool. Leo listened. He just listened. When I finally ran out of words, there was a long silence on the line. I thought he might have fallen back asleep. Then he spoke, his voice clear and steady, a lighthouse beam cutting through my fog. Listen to me, Ethan, he said. And I mean really listen. You didn't lose your family tonight. You've been losing them in pieces every time you paid a bill they should have paid. Every time you swallowed an insult. Every time you hoped they'd change. Tonight isn't the night you lost them. Tonight is the night you finally stopped letting them carve pieces off you. He took a breath. They built this situation, They laid every single brick of it. You didn't break it. You just finally, stopped holding the whole damned, rotten thing up on your shoulders. His words were like a splash of cold water. He was right. I wasn't the demolition crew. I was the lone survivor crawling out of the rubble. We talked for a little while longer, and by the time we hung up, my resolve had returned, forged stronger this time not just in anger, but in the certainty of self-preservation. I saved the spreadsheet, encrypting it with a complex password. I went online and paid the remaining balance on the restaurant bill with my emergency debit card. Then I took a single sheet of the hotel's stationery and a pen. I wrote only 10 words. Consider all financial support and all contact terminated. Effective immediately. I put it in an envelope, addressed it to Frank and Karen Taylor, and left it with the front desk to be delivered to their room. I booked the first flight to Chicago leaving at 7 a.m. I packed my bag, leaving the framed photo of the 5-year-old boy and his hero sitting face down on the nightstand. He didn't belong to me anymore. The first 3 days back in Chicago were a study in silence. A heavy, loaded silence. I went to work, sat in meetings, wrote code, but it all felt like a movie playing on a screen in front of me. The real world was my phone, which I expected to detonate at any moment. But it remained quiet. This wasn't peace. It was the deep, unnatural calm of the ocean pulling back before a tsunami. I used the time to prepare for the wave. The spreadsheet, born of a night of anguish, was now my primary asset. I spent an entire day annotating it, linking line items to scanned bank statements, screenshots of emails and text messages. I was building a case file, my engineer's brain finding a strange comfort in the meticulous organization of my own ruin. Then I hired a lawyer. I didn't go to a family law firm. I went to one of the top corporate litigation firms in the city and asked for their meanest, sharpest litigator. I got a woman named Diana Albright. She was in her 50s, with piercing gray eyes and a reputation for surgically dismantling her opponents in depositions. When I walked into her sleek, minimalist office overlooking the Chicago River, I knew I had come to the right place. I told her everything. I laid out the story, the family dynamics, the financial drain, and the final, humiliating night at the restaurant. I showed her the spreadsheet. She listened intently, her face a mask of professional neutrality, her fingers steepled under her chin. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, her eyes fixed on the spreadsheet projected onto her wall. "This is not a family squabble over an inheritance, Mr. Miller," she said finally, her voice as crisp and cool as the glass and steel of her office. "Based on your narrative and this data, this is a textbook case of long-term financial exploitation and undue influence. The restaurant incident is the emotional core, the casus belli, so to speak. But these numbers," she gestured to the screen, "these numbers are the weapon. They tell a story that is impossible to refute." The tsunami hit on the morning of the 4th day. My phone, which had been so quiet, erupted. It was a cacophony of desperation. A call from my mother, which I ignored. A call from my father, which I ignored. Then a rapid-fire series of texts from my sister, Rebecca. "What did you do? Mom is a wreck. The mortgage payment was rejected. She's having a full-blown panic attack. She can't breathe. Is this what you want? Call me right now, you selfish bastard." I screenshotted them and emailed them to Ms. Albright with the subject line, "Phase 2 has begun." Then came the voicemails. My phone's inbox filled up in under an hour. My mothers were tearful, pleading, arias of victimhood. "Ethan, honey, it's mommy. I don't understand what's happening. The bank called. They said the house. Oh, Ethan, please, whatever we did, we're sorry. Just please call me. Please fix this." My father's were guttural roars of rage. "You pick up this phone right now, you hear me? What in the hell do you think you're doing? You think you can just cut us off? After everything I've given you? You ungrateful little parasite." The juxtaposition was almost comical. One was begging me to fix the mess. The other was screaming at me for creating it. The one thing they had in common was a complete inability to see their own role in the disaster. Ms. Albright's instructions were simple. Excellent. They are emotional, and they are creating a record of their panic. Do not, under any circumstances, respond to any of them. Forward everything to me. The first official communication from their side arrived a week later. It was a letter, sent by registered mail, from a law firm in Ridgeview. The letterhead was ostentatious, and the name on it, Henderson and Associates, rang a bell. He was one of my father's golf buddies. The letter was a masterpiece of blustering legal threats and emotional manipulation. It accused me of inflicting severe emotional distress on my elderly parents, and of a cowardly abdication of my moral and familial duties. It concluded with a demand for the immediate reinstatement of all previous financial support, plus damages for their pain and suffering. I faxed it to Ms. Albright. I could hear her laugh over the phone. "Oh, this is wonderful," she said. "This is a gift. They've legally defined your payments as an expected duty. This Henderson is a fool. We'll arrange a 4-way meeting. Just you, me, Frank, and his duffer of a lawyer. No sisters, no mothers. We need to keep the emotional contamination to a minimum." The meeting was set for a neutral conference center in Philadelphia. Flying there, I felt a cold dread mixed with a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was meeting my father on my terms, on a battlefield of my choosing. He was already there when I walked in with Ms. Albright. He was sitting at a long, polished mahogany table, and the sight of him shocked me. The powerful, blustering CEO was gone. He looked small and diminished, his face sallow, his expensive suit hanging a little loosely on his frame. But the look in his eyes was pure, undiluted venom. His lawyer, Henderson, sat beside him, shuffling papers with a nervous energy, his cheap suit and comb-over doing nothing to inspire confidence. My father didn't say hello. He just glared at me as I took my seat opposite him. "Decided to show up, did you?" he spat. "Ready to stop this nonsense and act like a son?" I just looked at him, my expression blank. I didn't have to say anything. I had Ms. Albright. She began, her voice calm and even. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming. We are here to discuss the cessation of a series of regular, non-obligatory financial transfers from my client, Mr. Ethan Miller, to his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Frank Taylor. My client has elected to discontinue these transfers." Henderson, the lawyer, gave a loud, dismissive scoff. "Non-obligatory? That's absurd. This is a family matter. It's called support. It's what children do for their parents. Your client is throwing a temper tantrum over a harmless family joke." Ms. Albright slowly raised an eyebrow. The gesture was more intimidating than a shout. "A $12,000 joke, Mr. Henderson? One that was planned a week in advance with the restaurant staff? We have a sworn affidavit from the restaurant owner, as well as the security footage of Mr. Taylor arranging the prank, should you wish to view it. Henderson's smug expression faltered. He shot a nervous glance at my father. That's not the point. Frank snarled, slamming his hand on the table. He is our son. He has a responsibility to us. An interesting choice of words, Ms. Albright said, leaning forward slightly. Let's talk about responsibility and propositions. My client was under the distinct impression, based on multiple verbal assurances from you, Mr. Taylor, that his significant financial contributions to your company, Taylor Innovations, were investments made in exchange for a future seat on the board. Is that not the case? My father's face, which had been red with anger, went pale. This he had not expected. Those were family discussions. Father-son talks. They were business propositions made to solicit funds. Ms. Albright countered smoothly. Which brings us to the other funds. She opened her laptop and connected it to the large monitor on the wall. My spreadsheet filled the screen. It was no longer just my private monument to pain. It was a public indictment. The title was stark and professional. Analysis of Personal Financial Transfers, E. Miller to F. and K. Taylor, et al., 2013 to 2023. Ms. Albright let the list of transactions scroll slowly, methodically, down the screen. The sheer volume of it was damning. Mortgages, luxury car payments, credit card bills from Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue, country club dues, loans for vaguely defined business expenses. Over the past 10 years, Ms. Albright stated, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room, my client has transferred, by our conservative estimate, a documented total of $457,219.34 to you, your wife, and your business interests, Mr. Taylor. These funds appear to have been systematically used to subsidize a lifestyle and a failing business that you could not afford, all while my client was being led to believe he was investing in his own future. The room was dead silent. Henderson was staring at the screen, his mouth hanging open like a fish. My father was frozen, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. The mask of the powerful patriarch, the respected CEO, had been utterly incinerated. All that was left was the man underneath. A weak, desperate con man who had just been caught. He finally turned his gaze from the screen to me. It was a look of pure, venomous disbelief. You kept a list? He whispered, his voice cracking. All this time, you were keeping a goddamn list? I met his gaze, and for the first time I didn't flinch. The numbers don't lie, I said, my own voice quiet, but heavier than any shout. The meeting ended without a resolution. They didn't agree to our terms. They couldn't. To do so would be to admit guilt. They just sat there, broken and exposed. As we were packing our briefcases, Henderson practically ran over to Ms. Albright, trying to engage in a hushed, panicked negotiation. But I only had eyes for my father. He just kept staring at me, the hatred in his eyes now swirling with a new, delicious emotion. Fear. He was afraid of the numbers. He was afraid of the truth. But most of all, for the first time in my 32 years of life, he was afraid of me. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had just shifted permanently. The stalemate at the lawyer's office was not an end, but a beginning. The direct assault had failed spectacularly, so they changed tactics. They couldn't bully me with lawyers, so they decided to try and break me with whispers. The quiet siege began. Started about a week after the meeting. I got a call from Bill, the head of a marketing firm that had been one of my most important clients for over 5 years. We had a great relationship, built on trust and results. But his voice on the phone was strained, anxious. Ethan, hey, got a minute? He started, skipping the usual pleasantries. Listen, something weird happened. I got an anonymous email this morning. It was nasty. Made some pretty serious allegations about your company's financial health. Said you were being investigated for misappropriating client funds. A spike of ice-cold adrenaline shot through me. This was a new level of warfare. Bill, I can assure you that is an absolute categorical lie. We're more financially stable than we've ever been. I believe you, I do, he said, though the anxiety in his voice didn't fade. But you know how this stuff works, Ethan. It's like a bad smell. Once it's out there, it's hard to get rid of. My partners are getting nervous. That was the first poison arrow. More followed. A few days later, a 1-star review popped up on my company's Glassdoor profile, purportedly from a former employee. It was a work of fiction, describing a toxic work environment and an unstable CEO me. It was carefully worded to sound just plausible enough to be damaging. Then another review appeared on a different tech forum. This one questioning our data security practices. This had Derek's fingerprints all over it. My brother-in-law, the politician. This was his arena. Not open combat, but quiet, deniable reputational assassination. He knew he couldn't beat me in a legal fight, so he was trying to bleed me out professionally, to make me so toxic that my clients and employees would abandon me. He was trying to destroy the one part of my life I had built myself, the one thing that was truly mine. The next few months were a grueling battle on a new front. I had to hire a reputation management firm to track and combat the anonymous smears. I had to have proactive, uncomfortable conversations with my key clients and my own team, assuring them that we were the target of a malicious campaign. It was expensive, exhausting, and deeply infuriating. While I was fighting the public relations war, Ms. Albright was escalating the legal one. The stalemate at the meeting gave her the opening she needed. They refused to negotiate in good faith, she explained to me over the phone. So now we proceed with formal discovery. We are petitioning the court to compel them to produce their complete, unredacted financial records for the last 10 years. Personal, business, everything. This is the part where they start to truly feel the pressure. She also began methodically gathering our own evidence into an ironclad case file. She sent a formal request for a sworn affidavit to Thomas, the owner of the Embers. He not only complied but wrote a scathing, 3-page account of the entire evening, detailing my father's premeditated comments and my family's callous behavior. He was, in his words, appalled and happy to testify in court if needed. Then Ms. Albright made the call to my Uncle James. James called me that night, and I could hear the weight of the world in his voice. Ethan, I just got off the phone with your lawyer. She's formidable. I know, I said. Uncle James, you don't have to do this. You don't have to get caught in the middle. I meant it. The last thing I wanted was for my war to cause collateral damage to the one person in my family who had ever shown me a shred of kindness. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. No, Ethan, he said finally, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. I do have to do this. I've been a quiet man my whole life. I've stood by and watched your father run roughshod over people, always telling myself it wasn't my business. I watched him do it to his own partners. I watched him do it to our mother, draining her savings after Dad died. I stood by. I stayed quiet. I'm not doing it again. Not this time. Not when it's you. A week later, a thick FedEx envelope arrived at Ms. Albright's office. It was from Uncle James. It contained a treasure trove of documents he had kept from his brief, disastrous stint working for my father's company years ago. There were internal emails Frank thought were long deleted, showing him boasting about using my investment money to fund a lavish trip to Europe for him and my mother. There were memos that showed him deliberately cooking the books to hide losses from his other investors. It was the smoking gun, a clear pattern of fraud and deception in my father's own words. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that sealed their fate, came, ironically, from my mother. In a desperate, misguided attempt to bypass the lawyers, she broke the no-contact agreement and left me a long, rambling, tear-filled voicemail. It was a symphony of manipulation, a greatest hits of her emotional blackmail techniques. Ethan, honey, it's Mommy, she began, her voice already cracking. I don't know why you're doing this to us. Your father, he's a shell of himself. He's not sleeping, he's barely eating. You've broken his heart, you've broken my heart. Is this how you repay us for all the sacrifices we made? We gave you everything. The best schools, nice clothes, a roof over your head. We sacrificed so you could have a better life, and you turn on us like this. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. But this time I wasn't the audience. I was the critic, and I saw all the holes in the script. The best schools were the local public schools. The nice clothes were hand-me-downs. The only sacrifices had been mine. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved the audio file and forwarded it directly to Ms. Albright. An hour later, she called me, and I could hear a rare note of triumph in her voice. This is the nail in the coffin, Ethan, she said. In her own words, she has just established a quid pro quo. She explicitly states that her sacrifices entitled her to your support. She's defined the relationship as transactional. We have the premeditated humiliation at the restaurant, we have the financial records showing exploitation, we have third-party testimony, we have your uncle's evidence of fraud, and now we have this. They have absolutely no legal or moral ground left to stand on. The quiet siege had failed. Their last-ditch effort to destroy my reputation had only strengthened it, and their final attempt at emotional manipulation had just handed us our most powerful weapon. We didn't need another meeting. We didn't need any more threats. Ms. Albright compiled everything, the spreadsheet, the affidavits, the emails, the audio file, into a single comprehensive digital file. A formal settlement offer was drafted. It was simple. They would sign a legally binding agreement to cease all forms of contact, direct or indirect, for perpetuity, and waive any and all future claims, financial or otherwise, on me or my estate. In return, we would not proceed with a public lawsuit and would keep the more damning evidence of fraud under seal. The package was emailed to Henderson, their lawyer. The message was clear. They could accept their private, quiet ruin. Or we would drag them into the public square and ensure their complete and utter annihilation. The choice was theirs. The answer from my father's side didn't come in the form of a signed agreement or a lawyer's letter. Came as a deafening silence. For 6 months, there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no anonymous reviews. The quiet siege was over. They had retreated. Those 6 months were transformative. The battle against Derek's smear campaign, as stressful as it was, had forced me to be proactive and transparent. I held meetings with my key clients and even my entire team. I didn't get into the sordid details of the family drama. I simply stated the facts. My company and I have been the target of a malicious, anonymous campaign of disinformation. It is personal, it is ugly, and it is false. My only response is to continue to do the best work of our lives and let our results speak for themselves. My team rallied around me. My clients, seeing my honesty and our unwavering commitment to our work, doubled down on their loyalty. We didn't just weather the storm. We emerged from it stronger, more unified, with a reputation for integrity that no anonymous troll could tarnish. My business grew by 30% that year. But the most significant change wasn't professional. It was personal. I had spent my entire adult life channeling my energy and resources into a black hole. Now, with that black hole sealed off, I had a surplus of both. I started volunteering at a local incubator that helped young, underprivileged entrepreneurs get their ideas off the ground. I remember one kid in particular, a brilliant young woman named Sophia who had an idea for an app to help low-income families find affordable childcare. She was passionate and smart, but she was intimidated by the world of venture capital and business plans. I just don't know how to talk to these people, she confessed to me one afternoon over coffee. They all seem so powerful. I feel like I have to pretend to be someone I'm not. Don't, I told her. The words coming from a place of deep, personal experience. The moment you start pretending, you start losing. Be honest. Be passionate. And most importantly, know your numbers. Know your value. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you should be grateful just to be in the room. Seeing the fire in her eyes as she absorbed that advice, seeing her secure her first round of seed funding a few months later, that gave me a feeling of satisfaction purer than anything I had ever chased in my own family. I was finally making a real investment, and the returns were immeasurable. The news of my old family's collapse came in pieces, like reports from a distant, crumbling empire. The first piece was an article a friend sent me from the Ridgeview Gazette Online. Local tech firm, Taylor Innovations, files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The article was brief, citing insurmountable debt, and a failure to secure a final round of private investment. I read the words and I felt nothing. It was like reading a weather report from a city I'd never visit again. A few weeks after that, the Zillow listing popped up in my social media feed, an algorithmic ghost from my past. It was my childhood home. The photos were professionally done but sterile, showing cavernous, empty rooms stripped of my mother's ostentatious furniture and my father's self-aggrandizing portraits. The grand piano was gone. The Persian rugs were gone. All that was left was the hollow shell. They were selling it in a short sale, a desperate attempt to pay off their creditors. The loss of the house, I knew, would be a blow to my father's ego from which he would never recover. The final communication, the epilogue to the entire sordid saga, came late one Tuesday night. It was an email from Rebecca, sent from a new, anonymous-looking address. The subject line was blank. I almost deleted it without reading, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it open. The email was short, but every word was dripping with a venomous, self-pitying rage. I hope you're happy. I hope you're sitting up there in your fancy Chicago apartment, looking down on all of us, feeling proud of what you've done. You won. You got your precious revenge. So now you're free. Good for you. But I'm the one who has to drive over to that pathetic, disgusting little rented condo that smells like old people and failure every Sunday. I'm the one who has to watch mom cry into her instant coffee and watch dad just stare at the peeling paint on the wall. I'm the one whose husband has to explain to his donors why his father-in-law is a bankrupt disgrace. You got out, Ethan. You flew away. Don't ever forget that some of us are still trapped in the wreckage you created. So you tell me who's the real winner here. I read the email 3 times. The lack of self-awareness was breathtaking. She wasn't angry that they had exploited me. She was angry that my refusal to be exploited had shattered her comfortable, privileged world. In her mind, I hadn't escaped a burning building. I had been the one to light the match. But she was right about one thing. I was free. And her email, in its own twisted way, was the final confirmation that I had done the right thing. Her golden child status had never been a privilege. It was a prison. A gilded cage she had willingly locked herself inside. She had played the part of the perfect daughter so well for so long that she no longer knew who she was without the applause, without the status, without the big house. Now that the stage had burned down, she was just lost in the smoke. I felt a brief, fleeting moment of pity for her. We were both casualties of the same war, we'd just been wounded in different ways. She had survived by becoming a collaborator. I had survived by becoming a refugee. I didn't write back. There was nothing to say that she would ever be able to understand. I dragged her anonymous email address to my block list, a final, quiet act of severance. The silence that followed was no longer the eerie calm before the storm. It was the deep, profound, and welcome silence of peace. It's been a little over a year now since that night at the Embers. When I look back on the man I was then, it feels like looking at an old photograph of a distant relative. I recognize the face, but I don't know the person. That man was defined by his relationship to others. A son, a brother, a financial resource. He spent so much time trying to fit into the roles they had created for him that he had forgotten how to just be himself. My life today is quieter, but it's infinitely more my own. My business continues to grow, built now on a foundation of my own making, not one I was trying to patch up for someone else. I still volunteer at the incubator. Watching Sophia's app launch last month, seeing the real, positive impact it was having on people's lives, gave me a sense of purpose that a seat on my father's crumbling board could never have provided. I found that peace isn't a destination you arrive at. It's not a triumphant victory parade. It's a quiet, internal landscape that you learn to cultivate. It shows up in the small moments, like this afternoon. I was taking a walk through Lincoln Park, clearing my head after a long day of meetings. The Chicago skyline was etched against a brilliant blue sky, and the air was filled with the sounds of a city at play. Near the lagoon, I saw a father with his young son, maybe 5 or 6 years old, trying to get a bright red kite to catch the wind. The kite dipped and dove, and the boy shrieked with a mixture of frustration and delight. The father laughed, a deep, easy sound, and knelt, adjusting the tail. "A little more running start, buddy," he said. "You've got this." On the next try, the kite caught a gust of wind and soared upwards, a splash of red against the blue. The boy's cheer was pure, unadulterated joy. The father beamed, then scooped the boy up and set him on his shoulders, just like in that old photograph that I'd left behind in that hotel room. I stood and watched them for a moment, a stranger observing a simple, perfect moment of love. And I smiled. It was a real smile, not forced, not for anyone's benefit. But it was a complex smile. It was a smile born of a hard-won peace, but tinged with the bittersweet ghost of a loss. It was the quiet acknowledgement that there are some things that, once broken, can never be perfectly mended. I would never have that simple, uncomplicated moment with my own father. That kite was never going to fly, and I realized, in that moment, that I was okay with that. The grief was no longer a gaping wound. It was a scar, a faint silvery line that was now just a part of my own personal history. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just a reminder of how I got here. I went home, and on an impulse, I opened my encrypted files on my laptop. I typed in the password, and there it was. The spreadsheet. $457,219.34. It looked like a historical document, an artifact from a buried civilization. It had been my sword and my shield. It had been the catalyst for my liberation. But its job was done. Holding on to it now felt like holding on to the anger, and I was tired of being angry. My debt was never to them. It was to myself. A debt of dignity, of self-respect, and of peace. And that debt had finally been paid. I clicked on the file, my cursor hovering over it. I dragged it across the screen until it was over the small icon of a trash can. A confirmation window popped up, as it always does. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this item? I took a deep breath, and I clicked yes. The file vanished with a soft, satisfying whoosh. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window, looking out at the endless, glittering expanse of the city. My city. My life. A life I had chosen. A life I had fought for. A life that was finally completely my own. And I didn't look back.